"Sir. I'm not sure if I should be showing you this." The mall security guard's voice was low, hesitant, like he was already regretting the conversation before it had even started. I had just finished paying for our groceries when he approached me near the exit. My wife had stepped aside a minute earlier to take what she said was a quick call from the school. Nothing unusual. At least, that's what I believed at the time. The guard glanced down the hallway toward the dressing rooms and leaned a little closer. "I heard your wife mention you on the phone," he said quietly. "She said she told you something that wasn't true. I thought you might want to see this." A strange chill crept through my chest before I even knew why. I followed him down the narrow corridor toward a small office where several security monitors glowed against the wall. My footsteps echoed softly across the tile floor, each step heavier than the last. The guard pointed toward one of the screens showing a live camera feed near the dressing room hallway. And that's when I saw her. My wife stood there with her back against the wall, smiling down at her phone. Not a polite smile. Not the tired one I'd grown used to seeing lately. This one was softer, the corner of her mouth lifting slowly as she twirled a strand of hair around her finger, the exact same smile she used to give me when we first started dating. Her voice carried faintly through the hallway. "Relax," she whispered into the phone. "I told him it was the school calling. He bought it." She laughed quietly. In that moment, something inside me went completely silent. My hands felt strangely cold. Until that day, I believed loyalty meant never questioning the person you loved. I believed trust was the strongest foundation a marriage could have. But standing there watching the woman I had spent 18 years building a life with whisper secrets meant for someone else, I realized something most people learn too late. Trust doesn't always shatter with shouting and accusations. Sometimes it fractures in complete silence. The guard looked at me awkwardly. I simply nodded and walked back to the parking lot, placed the shopping bags in the trunk, and waited. A few minutes later she returned, smiling like nothing had happened. "Sorry," she said as she slipped into the passenger seat. "School stuff." I smiled and kissed her forehead. "Of course," I told her. But the moment I saw that security monitor, a clock had started ticking. And before the week was over, I would discover that the phone call was the least dangerous secret she was hiding.
That night I lay awake beside her, staring at the ceiling while the room sat in complete darkness. Her breathing was slow and steady, the same rhythm I had fallen asleep to for nearly 2 decades. Normally that sound meant comfort, safety, but now every breath felt like a reminder that I was lying next to someone I suddenly didn't recognize. At some point during the night she shifted slightly and slid her phone under the pillow. She used to leave it on the nightstand, always had.
It was a small thing, almost meaningless, but when you've spent years studying behavior patterns, you learn something important. The smallest changes are often the loudest signals. I didn't confront her the next morning. I didn't ask questions or accuse her of anything. Instead, I watched. I paid attention to details I would have ignored before. The gym bag that stayed in the back of her car but was never unpacked. The sudden volunteer nights she claimed the school needed help with. The way she tilted her phone screen away every time a message appeared. None of those things proved anything on their own, but together they formed a pattern, and patterns are difficult to hide once someone starts looking for them. Before running my construction company, I spent 6 years working as an intelligence analyst. That kind of work teaches patience. It teaches observation. Most importantly, it teaches that people rarely lie perfectly. They leave small gaps, tiny inconsistencies in timelines, behavior, and routine. Within 3 days, I started writing everything down. Every late return home, every unusual expense, every excuse that didn't quite line up with the time of day. The list grew longer faster than I expected. By the end of the week, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't uncovering new behavior. I was finally noticing behavior that had probably been happening for months.
That's when I made a phone call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Marcus owed me a favor from a difficult custody case I helped him through long ago. These days, he worked in digital forensics, recovering files people believed were permanently deleted. When he answered the phone and heard my voice, he didn't ask many questions. He just said, "Send me what you've got." 2 days later, he called back. His voice sounded different.
"Daniel," he said quietly, "before I send these files, you should probably sit down." Because what he had found wasn't just evidence of an affair. It was the beginning of a much bigger lie.
When Marcus sent the files, I opened them alone in my office late at night after the kids were asleep. At first it was just text messages, then voice notes, then photos. Each file added another piece to a story I never wanted to read. I thought seeing proof of the affair would be the hardest part. But strangely, that wasn't what hit me the most. What actually hurt was her tone in the messages, the excitement in her words, the playful jokes, the way she spoke about our life like it was just a temporary inconvenience she had to manage until something better came along. One voice message stopped me cold. Her voice was soft, almost amused. "He trusts me completely," she said with a quiet laugh. "He never checks anything." I listened to that recording 3 times before finally closing the laptop. Trust. The one thing I believed was protecting our marriage had become the very reason she thought she could betray it without consequences. Then I opened the photo Marcus had marked with a red tag. The timestamp showed it was taken inside the same mall the day the security guard stopped me. The image was slightly grainy but clear enough to understand. She stood near the dressing room corridor, talking to a man about my age. They weren't kissing. They weren't even fully touching. His hand hovered just close enough to hers to make the meaning obvious. But it wasn't their proximity that stopped my breathing. It was her expression. She looked happy, not the exhausted, distant version of herself I'd been living with lately. This was the woman I remembered from years ago, the one who used to smile like that when we first started building our life together. That realization hurt far more than the evidence itself. But something unexpected happened instead of anger. I didn't feel the urge to scream or break anything. What replaced it was something colder. Focus. Within 24 hours, I contacted a family attorney and arranged a confidential meeting. Within 48 hours, I sat down with our financial advisor and asked him a simple question. If someone has been quietly moving money from a joint account, I said, how far back can we trace it? He studied the transaction records for several minutes before leaning back slowly. Then he said something that confirmed my worst suspicion. Because the transfers weren't random, they were going somewhere specific. And whoever she was seeing, his name was already hidden inside those transactions. Once the financial records were examined, the situation became impossible to ignore. The transfers had been small enough to avoid attention. A few hundred here, a few hundred there, but over time they added up to a significant amount. The money was being sent to a debit account connected to a recently created business registration. At first, the company name looked generic, something you might see on hundreds of paperwork filings. But when my attorney examined the registration documents more carefully, one detail stood out. The initials of the company matched the same initials that appeared in the message threads Marcus had recovered. That's when the entire picture finally came into focus. This wasn't a careless affair. It was something planned. And when people make plans, they leave trails. Instead of confronting her at home, I decided to end things differently. I reserved a quiet conference room inside a downtown co-working building, a place where business meetings happened all day without attracting attention. Then I sent 2 invitations, one to my wife, one to the man she had been seeing. The messages were simple and professional. She believed she was coming to meet a potential investor for my construction company. He believed he was attending a meeting about a possible partnership opportunity. Neither of them realized the meeting was actually with me. They arrived together, not holding hands, but close enough that the truth was obvious the moment they walked through the door. When they saw me sitting at the table, both of them froze. My wife's expression drained of color instantly. The man looked confused at first, then cautious. I stood slowly and gestured toward the chairs across from me. "Sit down," I said calmly. Neither of them argued. I slid a thick envelope across the table. Inside were the bank records, the messages, the business registration documents, and the photos Marcus had recovered. She didn't even open it. Her hands were already trembling. "Daniel, I can explain," she whispered. I shook my head. I'm not here for an explanation, I said quietly. I'm here to end something. The man leaned forward like he wanted to challenge me. But the moment he looked inside the envelope, his confidence disappeared completely. Because the evidence inside that file didn't just expose their relationship. It proved something much more serious. And by the time that meeting ended, both of them realized their secret had already begun to destroy far more than a marriage. Once the meeting ended, events began moving faster than either of them expected. The legal paperwork had already been filed, the joint financial accounts were frozen, and the house was protected under clauses we had signed years earlier when my father helped us secure the mortgage. She didn't know any of that until the day she came home and discovered the locks had been changed. A formal letter explaining the legal restrictions was taped to the front door. Later, when I reviewed the security footage, I saw her standing on the porch for nearly 10 minutes reading the paper over and over again. Eventually, she sat down on the steps and covered her face with her hands. Watching that moment felt strangely distant. For years I imagined that if our marriage ever collapsed, it would happen with shouting and accusations. Instead, ended in silence. A few days later, she asked if we could meet in person. We chose a small cafe near our old neighborhood. Ironically, it was the same place where we once sat together years earlier, deciding what names we liked for our future children. When she walked inside, she looked different. No mock-up, no wedding ring, no confidentes might, just exhaustion. She sat down across from me and stared at the table for a long moment before speaking. I didn't think you would ever find out, she admitted quietly. Not because you're naive, but because you trusted me. I nodded once. There was nothing left to argue about anymore. She reached in her purse and placed a photograph on the table. It was from our wedding day, two young people smiling at a future they believed would last forever. I didn't want to be the only one still holding on to this, she said softly. I looked at the photo for a long moment before folding it carefully and placing it in my jacket pocket. Then I stood up. I'm not here to punish you, I said calmly. But I'm not here to save you either. Tears finally filled her eyes. Will you ever forgive me? She asked. I paused before answering. I already have. Because forgiveness wasn't about repairing what she destroyed. It was about making sure the past would never control the life I was about to rebuild.